Welcome to everyone who's tuning in to join us for the Samuel Lawrence Foundation's First Friday series. This is our March edition. My name is Taylor Moore, and I'm the Program Director of the Samuel Lawrence Foundation. For today's special edition of First Fridays, we have assembled a wonderful and dynamic panel of women leaders who are working to ensure that women, young girls, and other often disenfranchised voices are all over the world have a chance to better be heard. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to our moderator, Lance Gould, who is the CEO of Brooklyn Story Lab, to go ahead and introduce our speakers today.
Thank you, Taylor, and welcome to all. Diversity is under attack. There's no question about that. It is being scapegoated for a slew of recent disasters and failures, from aviation crashes to the Los Angeles wildfires. NASA received a memo ordering it to scrap key terms from its website related to accessibility, indigenous people, women, and other topics deemed quote unquote wasteful. A national museum papered over all of the plaques that celebrated the women and people of color who have served the National Security Agency. Tomorrow is International Women's Day, so today we wanted to assemble a panel of women who've been working their whole careers to fight for equality for women and girls. Joining us today as panelists, we have two guests: Amy Willard Cross, founder of Gender Fair, a public benefit corp which is the first consumer rating system for gender equality, and Amber Nuttall, sustainability director of Extreme International and founder of the Extreme Hangout. We're going to start off learning a little bit more about each of our dynamic panelists, and then we'll transition into a roundtable discussion to hear their thoughts about the current state of gender equality. Let's start off with Amber. Amber, you are an extreme sports pioneer. In the last decade alone, you have paddleboarded the 236 miles of the Thames River in England, became the first woman to cross the English Channel on a paddleboard, and became the first person to paddle around the Bahamian island of New Providence. The company you own with your husband, Extreme International, produces videos that garner 300 million video views every month. Tell us how you got started with extreme sports.
Hey, Lance, first of all, thank you so much for having me join you guys today. It's a complete pleasure. Like everybody's journey in extreme sports, the first happens when your parents open the door and let you go outside. Because when you're small, everything feels like an extreme sport. You're constantly falling over, and you kind of got to get used to it, and you learn how to get on your feet, and away you go. And my parents were crazy about the outdoors. That they knew that was the best place for us. I had an incredibly privileged childhood, born in the UK, but kind of grew up a little bit all over the place until my parents ultimately settled between Switzerland and the Bahamas. So, I mean, you literally cannot get better positioning than living in the Alps on the one hand, and then being out on the open ocean on the other hand. For me, it was just love at first sight. And my adventure playground as a child then obviously led me to developing different passions for different sports and continuing to practice. It's still today, even at my advanced age, I am a big ski tourer. I love to disappear into the quiet parts of the mountains where most other people don't go to during the winter months. And then, of course, on the ocean and under the ocean, as much time on it as I could possibly get. And a lot of my life still happens out in the Bahamas, so I'm deeply grateful for that. It's a really beautiful place. It's restorative. It helps me keep my body healthy and happy. It helps me keep my mind and my heart healthy and happy too, just as importantly.
Well, that's wonderful, and you've channeled that background and that passion for sports into this company, Extreme International. Now you're the sustainability director of Extreme and co-founder of Extreme Hangout, where you offer a forum with a stage and audio and video equipment to others at UN events like the annual COP conferences and other such convenings. Tell us about the inspiration for this, and particularly how you're giving more opportunities for women to be visible at these critical conferences.
Well, I'm going to start with that last bit first, because I have to say, I mean, that's almost like the easiest bit. Women have found their voice, which I absolutely love. And I'm so proud of the fact that without even trying, over 61% of our speakers over the course of the last 4.5 years have been women. And
Amazing.
I celebrate that every single time. But the reason we got into this, and I managed to persuade my husband that this was a really great idea for us, is around 2018, 2019. We all know, I mean, I call it the Greta Thunberg effect. Young people started to take to the streets, airing their distress at the state of the world back then, and the lack of urgency that was being applied to coming up with the right solutions and moving the world in the kind of direction we'd all love to see it going in. I happily marched with all of them, but I myself felt a deep sense of sadness that it was taking young people in order that suddenly it was hitting the front pages of newspapers and headline stories around the world. And I wanted them to know that there were people out there who had their backs. And our extreme and adventure sports community are, the vast majority of them are also under the age of 35. And whether you are surfing in the ocean and struggling with pollution issues and sewage and plastic pollution, or you are a mountaineer and the glaciers you go to climb aren't there anymore, you're a skier and there's snowfall is not happening, our community see this and they witness this, and they're sort of almost living on the front lines of climate change in that respect. So I saw that there was a great opportunity to bring these two together. And then the critical aspect of this one was COP26 was then announced as coming to the UK. So I was like, well, why don't we organize an event up in Glasgow and we'll hold the space and let's make it about intergenerational conversation. Let's make sure that these young people understand that we want them to be part of the solutions and we value their contribution, but also to reassure them and let them know, because there are brilliant and amazing people out there who do have their backs and who are working incredibly hard, many of whom have been working for decades on this, and that there are today still modern companies and organizations who they may be picking up the mantle a little later on in the day, but they're still going there. So there is movement in the right direction. I don't want people to lose heart. And I want them also to feel that it's a cool place to be in, and that this is a fun space, and that actually together we can co-create the 2050 of our dreams, not our nightmares. So that was very much the vibe that we were looking for. A lot of these global conferences, as we all know, can be very overwhelming, and they host them in sort of windowless rooms. They're over air conditioned. They serve you terrible food. The chairs are uncomfortable. And these people are sort of sent to COP to go and make the best possible decisions on behalf of the planet and humanity. And I'm like, I'm not really sure this really the kind of vibe that they need. So we very much bring in a much more youthful vibe. Hence being called the Extreme Hangout. There's space to hang out and convene, and we serve great food, and we do cinema screenings and health and wellness events, and there's gallery space, and we have studios to record podcasts and film video messages. And that was kind of how Extreme Hangout was born. And unfortunately, it was very successful in the first year, so I've had to keep doing it ever since.
Well, it's such a lovely idea, and and just listening to you now is just so hopeful. Like in these times of great distress and tumult, it's great to hear not only what you're saying, but the actions that you provide, and thank you for that. And similarly, I want to thank Amy, who is the founder of GenderFair, the first consumer rating systems for gender equality. GenderFair produces ratings on brands, colleges, vendors, and nonprofits so that consumers can align their dollars with their values of equality. Amy, you were also named a global thinker by Foreign Policy for your work in, quote, economic girl power. Tell us about your journey to developing this unique and critically important rating system.
Sure. I would tell you the whole journey because that would start when I was 10 years old, and I don't think we have time for that, but ask me later. So I, as a journalist and a feminist, at a certain age, I want to say, what can I do to serve? How can I do to help? And I realized one of the problems I wanted to attack is money for women. So I realized that in our economy, women weren't getting a large enough share of money from the large companies. Like they weren't the highest paid people. There was not equal pay. They were not getting the management jobs. They were not getting the bonuses. And I realized that women weren't asking much of the companies to which they pay lots of money. So even though my generation, half of women were graduating from college. By the time I was a grown up and an older grown up, we weren't getting half of all the responsibility. And that just woke me up and shocked me terribly. Like, why are women not participating equally in the economy and all its benefits? Because, of course, in America, you get as much equality and freedom as you can pay for. So anyway, again, as a feminist and a journalist, I thought I could do data journalism to help fix the problem, because data journalism can actually create change. There's something called the Human Rights Campaign Index. They looked at companies on their LGBTQ policies, and they've created change in like 1,500 companies. And every year they push the bar farther. Of course, now they're losing that progress, which is terrible. So we're going to fight back. But so people talk in abstract about women's consumer power, saying, well, women control 70 to 85% of all consumer spending. But so what? So what we wanted to do with Gender Fair is we wanted to give people a way to act on their beliefs of equality. So the idea is that you would choose to buy from companies. You can choose to buy from GM, which has a great score on our app, or you could look at Tesla, which at one point had a 0 on our app. And that was the first time we rated it. Eventually, you could actually search the word woman on all Tesla documentation, and you would never find that. So that's the idea. We want to give people a tool to act. We say data plus action equals change. So ultimately, we want to have a global female financial rebellion towards the major economy, and not give our money to companies that don't serve women, which means usually other people well. So that's the idea behind it. Like fair trade also created massive change in our culture. It takes a long time, actually, because it's a new way of thinking, right? So Gender Fair is an entirely new way of thinking, where women or people start to ask, well, how does this organization or company or college or nonprofit serve women? Does it deliver fairness? Does it have these principles of basic fairness? So now, do you want to hear why I wanted there to be more money in women's hands?
Absolutely.
Okay, here's the why. Not just to buy things, but because in America, the country where I vote, I also realized that we didn't have the Equal Rights Amendment, which I marched for as a little girl. We don't even sure whether it's actually in law or not yet, but we didn't have the Equal Rights Amendment because we didn't have enough women in Congress to pass this legislation. And we didn't have enough women in Congress, I realized, because we weren't being funded equally electorally. So it all comes back to, like, rights and money come back to each other in America. So the fact that, of course, that I think I could help on this problem is kind of crazy, but call me Don Quixote. So that's the idea. Not enough. So I want to bring more capital into women's hands. I think we could do a lot politically and culturally and socially when women have a more equal say in our society, more equal power. And of course, in our culture, the American culture, power is a synonym for money is a synonym for power, and vice versa.
It's such a brilliant idea, and it's just like Amber's initiative is so reassuring. This is also so reassuring, and it's also it's such a great compass point, because so many of us want to put our dollars. We don't want to go to certain restaurants. We don't want to purchase certain products that we know are affiliated with things that on both sides of the aisle, people want to back the products and the businesses that align with their values. And this is such an important compass point. In researching this, Amy, I came across a data point that women represent a growth market more than twice as big as China and India combined. You coined a concept that you wrote about in Time magazine, which echoes some of what you were just discussing, but I'd love to put it into this framework. The concept that you coined is the female domestic product,
That's
FDP.
Right.
Tell us more about that and what power the FDP has.
Sure. I came up with the idea like about 10 years ago when I started building Gender Fair. So the idea is I wanted to think about how much money do women control in the culture. My son, who's an economist, of course, tells me it's not really a very good number, but the GDP isn't a very good number either because it doesn't count, environmental externalities. So the FDP is a way of thinking about how much money women earn as their salaries, how much revenue women's businesses take in every year, the donations of women's nonprofit organizations, And also, what else? I guess the revenue. I think I got all that. Also, that's how much money women comes into women's hands every year. It's different from capital because that capital is more static. But anyway, so that's the idea of the FDP, and I want to grow the FDP. And the way we do grow the FDP is intentionally buying from women-owned businesses, donating to women's nonprofits, which only get 2% of the total share of donations in the United States. And we're 50% of the people, but we have a lot of problems to deal with in our nonprofits, so we still don't get an equal share. And investing in women's companies, when you have more money in women's hands, we can invest more money and build women's companies, and that's also at 2% of venture capital funding. So it's very hard for capital just doesn't seem to go to women. It seems to have this dam that doesn't flow. So that's the idea, is to bring more capital from the GDP into the FDP, which will also grow both of them. And that's what I really hope to do. So as I said, business, and then here's the other thing: women-owned businesses. You can do this as a vendor or as a consumer. You can buy from a women-owned business. Right now, corporations only spend about 1% of their total spend to women-owned businesses. So, we don't move. Capital is not going to move unless we move it ourselves with our dollars. So that's one thing I want to do. And I mentioned about nonprofits getting 2%. Women's salaries are only 82% of what men's are in the United States.
Is there a shout out that you want to give to a particular company that just stands out that's screaming for support in a field crowded with other organizations that do not back women?
Oh gosh, well, we have about 80 that meet the metrics. Our database has about only 12% of companies meet this basic metric, which I didn't actually explain to you earlier, but that we don't just say, Amy decides what's good. We use these principles for the UN, the Women Empowerment Principles, and that's our measurement is based on that. And we have journalists collect the data. We don't just rely on what companies doing a survey. So,
Amy,
companies that I like, I'll try to.
Would you mind repeating that last line? Because I think there may have been a video glitch. Just repeat that last line about.
By the measurement. So I didn't just decide what to measure. It's not what Amy Cross chooses is right. We use the UN Women Empowerment Principles as a guideline for our metrics. And they have about 5 major categories. I won't get into it all. You can look it up on our website. But so that's what we measure. And as for companies that do really well, like Citibank is the best bank. They did the best pay study in America, which was equating apples and not apples and oranges. Sort of there's the ways of collecting pay data. Logitech is amazing. Logitech is there. We work with them. They're funding great work and B2B vendors, and they still very, very focused on helping women in tech, which a lot of companies are moving away from. And Logitech just put out this amazing study about actions people can take. So that's a favorite. Sorry, I don't really think about having favorites, but I can add something later on.
No, that's fine. That's perfect.
Yeah, but on our website we list some of the major brands, and and mainly I also think buying from women is the best thing, because women or Black-owned businesses. This is the way we move capital.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for sharing some of your personal journey with us and how you got into what you're doing. Now let's bring Taylor back into the conversation and shift to talking about some of the obstacles faced by those of us who support gender equality. What do you find most alarming, and what are some of your suggestions that you might offer to navigate those obstacles? Let's start with Amy.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't know if this is a global or a American-focused conversation, but I know mostly about what's happening in America right now, and I'd say the current political environment is very hostile to women, and the business environment. We hear of organizations where their corporate sponsors are asking to be removed from their websites, which is, disheartening. And as you said, women are being removed from government walls. And even today, the big scandal yesterday was Apple Calendar removed International Women's Day from the calendar. So I have to say, as a human, as an earthling, as Tiffany Schlein calls us, that is incredibly painful to be written out of places where we've already been written. So that's a huge obstacle. We know that what else is happening? There's this anger about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when you think about it, people may not like diversity, but who's against equity? Who's against inclusion? These are very nice ideas. So I'm very disheartened by it. That's an obstacle. The SAVE Act, this new bit of legislation that's going to ask birth certificates to match up with current ID, it's going to stop a lot of women from voting. I mean, there's a lot of obstacles right now, but I guess that's why we're going to run an obstacle course, and Amber can probably teach me how to do that, because I'm not very good at extreme sports. And the return to office mandate. that is, in some way, some people want to work at the office, which is great, but having it be optional seems like the wisest thing for a lot of people. And or just not full time, because I know some young people want to go to the office, and I mean, I would like to go to an office if I used to love to go to my office when we still had one, but anyway, there's so many obstacles. Yeah, Title IX being maybe disbanded in the United States. So now, do you want to go to solutions, or is that enough obstacles do you want some more obstacles? What do you want?
Let me go to Amber first, and
Yeah.
then we'll come back to you for solutions.
Yeah.
Well, the obstacles are, they're not just in the US, that is for sure. And it's, I find it extraordinary that we're in 2025 and we're still even discussing it. I found it extraordinary, was it 3 years ago, when the UN published a document about gender equality and suggested that I think it was going to be another 150 years before we could expect gender equality.
Oh,
And
yes, yeah.
but it was like the way that people published that, and they were like, okay. I'm like, no, that's really not okay. That is, I'm like, we're thinking that we can, I don't know, hopefully turn the world around and achieve the goals that we need to by 2050 from a climate perspective. But we're going to leave the gender equality thing to be like, okay, that'll happen in 150 years' time. I'm like, that definitely doesn't happen. And I mean, I've always got my climate hat on anyway, but one of it's one of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, that were published by the UNFCCC, which deal with all of these climate conversations. Women and gender equality are absolutely one of these Sustainable Development Goals, because it is already proven that where there is more equality and where women are educated, young girls are educated, there are better outcomes in terms of managing land and farms and getting jobs. And that will all help us go in the right direction to achieve the climate goals. So we absolutely need to bring everybody along with us. It's very vexing, the whole thing. But I think we should talk about solutions, because I think there are so many of them out there. And I get excited about talking about the things that we can do and not worrying about the mess that we're in too much.
Well, let's talk about solutions in 1 second. But both of you just cited Amber. You cited the UN, and Amy, you cited some other GDP studies. But there's something called the Human Development Index, which rates every country on a number of data points for how developed it is and how successful economically it is. And it's really the countries, particularly the Scandinavian countries, and Japan and a few others, that are always top of the list because of how, to Amber's point, how women are have more equity in those countries. So maybe through the lens of solutions, we can talk about how what Amber just referred to about how equity leads to better economic outcomes. But Amy, do you want to start? And Taylor, feel free
And
to
environmental
weigh in
income.
as well.
And environmental outcomes as well. Like, the SDGs are super important. And when I was at the Clinton Global Initiative, the leader of the women's group there said, or the women's section, we should put the SDG 5 as a lens on all the SDGs, because when you solve for women, it helps solve for everything. And I love that thing.
For viewers, SDG 5 is the goal about gender equality.
So look at education through a gender lens, or environment through a gender, water through a gender lens. That creates more fairness. And I agree with you, Amber, that the fact that we can take that notion of, it'll take 200 years to become equal, that's just so unacceptable. I don't know how in the rational modern world we can say this is a right or righteous thing.
Yeah, Amy, I love what you said about using the lens. I'm always referring to this again with young people. They look at the world through a completely unique lens. They are part of a generation that, yes, we have experienced them growing up, but not at their age that they are. So we look at the world through, all of us, through different lenses, whether they may be gender lenses, religious, politics. We have so many different lenses that we layer over the top of each other. And we have to try and walk in other people's shoes in order to be able to just, I don't know, I kind of want everybody to just take a moment and just step back and breathe. Every single person on this planet has had a mother at some point or another, and most of us have been lucky enough to have mothers for quite a long period of time. And that we still seem to have grown men today who assume they all had mothers too, who don't want the very best for the women in their life and are not able to apply the same respect and values and love, or maybe they can't possibly think that they are. Um, I get very confused around that, but I think it's the most extraordinary opportunity. I mean, a little bit like that wonderful point with regards to women representing the largest growth market. Even was it larger than India and China combined?
Yes.
I mean, how extraordinary is that? And a room is always richer for sure, I believe, with women in it. We have our own unique perspectives. And by the way, we don't just use this brain. We're super aware that we also have another brain here, and we have another brain here as well. And I feel that we're more engaged in that, maybe because, well, for all kinds of different reasons. But yeah, it's a little bit like not just chopping your arm off. I mean, it's kind of like chopping yourself in half and expecting to be able to operate well. And we very much like when it comes to climate, where we're failing at the moment, we have to look at our narrative and we have to explore how we can empower people to feel comfortable with this equality that women are so desperately seeking today. Because I think there is a lot of confusion as to why it hasn't happened. And I think again, we do this a lot in the climate space too. You should do this, you need to do that. It's quite patronizing. The implication is that you're stupid if you don't do it, and it builds walls up and people push it away and they don't want to know about it. We have to find ways to break these walls down and make communities, or ensure that communities feel empowered to make these decisions and build this equality within their own communities and find that love themselves, because ultimately I do believe that it all does come back to love.
Mm-hmm. A good point about working in smaller communities. Because you look at like a global picture, it is quite daunting, but you can do a lot of things. A lot of people in America are saying that's a way to act politically and engage with, or just economically engage locally and take action. So I think that's a very good idea, a way to sort of deal with this obstacle. And I would,
it's like, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Taylor.
I was just going to say, yeah, while we're talking about that too, it's like what Amy mentioned earlier. It's like we vote with our dollar, right? And we can do that in our communities on a smaller scale as well. And it's like it's more important now than ever, with a lot of companies pulling back DEI policies and things like that, to go ahead and check a company's policies before you buy from them, right? Because every purchase that we make, it's a statement. It's a way that we show what we value. It's the way to show what kind of world that we want to build, what kind of world we want to live in. And when we're supporting women-owned businesses or companies that prioritize gender equality, companies that invest in women's leadership, we're actively like helping to shape the economy to reflect those priorities that we have, right? So it's like when you support a women-owned business or a women, run company, like it is a vote for women. And it's interesting too, because it's like studies, when we're talking about community again, like studies have shown that when women actually have more financial power, they reinvest that money back in their communities at much, much higher rates than men do. So when women succeed economically, all of our communities succeed as a whole as well.
Right. There's another obstacle that
That's
I want
a
to
good
point.
point.
There's another huge obstacle I want to point out. There's something called gender lens investing. I don't know. Have you all heard of this? Where you people who buy stocks and equities choose that they can put a gender lens and choose companies that do well, sort of on an index similar to ours, There are several of them. You can buy ETFs based on which companies have women CEOs or do well by women. And this is a very small portion of investment. And actually, we can show that these women companies, public companies that have high gender ratings, they make much more money. Like there was just a study that came out yesterday, but it still hasn't changed behavior. So there's these cultural impediments to people's change of where they spend their money, where they do anything, actually. And I find that very disheartening because we always thought that, in the capitalist society, more money is always the value, but it isn't always. Like the same thing, if you can invest well with gender lens funds and you don't do it and it makes more money, then what's your real value? Is it money or is it not supporting women? So
that's a very good point.
So instead of an obstacle, then there's a thing you can do. You can invest in gender lens funds or invest in women or Black-owned or minority-owned businesses. And that's another way you can fight these obstacles. The other thing I want to say about fighting obstacles is that people power are the best things in the world, isn't it? Like when people organize together as like what, you probably know Dandelion Project, Amber, right? The women of the environmental movement. Yeah. So the more we do this, the more we can change. There's the environmental movement, the feminist movement. And right now, if we want to keep on creating change, let's talk about a financial revolution for people power. That's how we can surmount these obstacles when enough people say we'd like things to be a little bit differently in their town or in their country. So I really do believe in collective action, whether it be economically or politically or socially. And I'm going to hope that nice earthlings can get together and do that.
Well, speaking of earthlings, that's a good segue to the next question. Let's talk about space. The world's richest men, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, are in their own mini space race. And as a side note, multiple media outlets have noted that their rockets are looking more and more like penises. But these men are also capitulating to the new administration in untold ways, while Musk has become an unelected overseer for the new administration. We know about stories like the women who are the heroes of Hidden Figures. What do we lose, Amber, Amy, Taylor? What do we lose when we deny women opportunities to participate in critical programs and instead delete references to their achievements on the NASA website, for example? Amber, let's start with you.
I mean, the deleting references to their achievements on a website. I mean, a little bit. I'm so horrified that Apple have removed International Women's Day off their calendar. I mean, it's like, guys, just because you eradicate the writing doesn't mean that it didn't happen. we all still know it happened. You can't write us out of history. So that seems very futile and rather desperate, actually. And sorry if you can hear a clock chiming in the background.
It's 1 o'clock and here and all's well.
Yes, exactly. All is well. So what do we lose when we deny women the opportunity to participate in these programs? I mean, as Amy said, it's that unique lens. It's those unique perspectives. We all have our own unique experiences. Again, it's like sort of saying, right, I'm gonna just operate with half of what is available to me. Well, why wouldn't you put everything into the room? I mean, that is a form of lunacy. I mean, of course, the great tragedy is for particularly the young girls and young women growing up today, because it breaks my heart to feel like they would feel that they're not as valued as the boys. And we know that that's happened across many societies and cultures. But we can change this. And I think that women like Amy, like Taylor, like so many others, the women from the Dandelion Project, I mean, they are an extraordinary group. The Female Quotient, there's a Women for the Environment WhatsApp group that I'm a part of here in the UK. I don't know how I would breathe without all of this support and love. Not that it's coming in my direction, but for knowing that it is going out there to support all these young women who are growing up. So actually, I believe that it doesn't take too much today as a young woman. The wonders of the internet, you can find solidarity and you can find great messaging out there. It's even when you are part of a community that where it may feel dark and oppressive, and you may not feel like you have those opportunities. I think there are chinks of light out there that we must be sure that we don't just grasp onto ourselves, but showcase and breathe life into as much as we possibly can, so that others can find them and reach out to them.
Amy, thoughts on that?
Thoughts on space? Well, I mean, I think women should have 50% equal opportunity in every endeavor that our culture does, and especially that the government funds, because we are 50% of taxpayers. So I find that very unfortunate. I look to see, I wonder if actually women who did extreme sports become astronauts. I only know one who went to my college, but there are space programs at Purdue. I looked it up actually. I was curious because I know nothing about space, and the space and the trips to Mars they don't interest me at all, because I want to clean this planet up before I go and buy another planet. But Purdue has programs. University of California has sent 13 women to space. So that's sort of very hopeful. But yeah, I think that I hope the U.S. government will include women in all these explorations, scientific explorations, equally. I mean, NASA has a lot of very powerful women there now. I know.
And I'd love to give this to Taylor too, but this question isn't limited only to space, but that sort of.
But you want to talk about space?
But more about what do we lose when we deny women opportunities to participate in critical programs like NASA? But Taylor, Amy, have a think on that, and Taylor, please weigh in.
Yeah, I mean, I think we lose, like we were saying before, we lose economic growth, we lose progress. We see all of these incredible women who have helped to innovate and help, drive our society forward. And I think it's seen as a threat a lot of the time. Again, not to bring up all of the DEI initiatives being, backrolled, but it's like, I think that diversity in gender and diversity in general, it's often used in the US as like a scapegoat for more systemic failures. Like for example, we're talking, the wildfires, or, all of these planes we've had falling out of the sky recently, right? Similar to rockets, but there's been a lot of aviation failures as of late. And I think there have been some commentators who have suggested that that the focus on diversity in hiring and hiring women and people of color in certain engineering roles have been the cause of the decline in safety standards. But in reality, that's not the case.
Particularly
right?
When officials are being laid off and the workers are overworked. That's more.
It's
likely.
Much more the reason. Yeah, there's a lot of corporate mismanagement, right? There's a lot of outdated infrastructure. There's a lot of cost cutting. But DEI again becomes the scapegoat. So I think it's again, we have to keep reframing the narrative, and kind of like Amber was saying earlier, it's not about, making people feel stupid and saying, well, that's wrong and this is right. It's explaining, it's having those conversations that may not always be the easiest to have, but it's like, no, look, here are the actual facts, here are the reasons, here are the statistics. Have those conversations with, on a grander scale, but also on a smaller scale with your family, with your friends, with people in your community, and just keep reframing that narrative and keep supporting women businesses and companies and the women in your life in general in the meantime. And I think that's just, it's baby steps to help reframe the whole narrative.
Mm.
I would just love to, if I can, there's a brilliant female astronaut that I know of, Nicole Stott, and she's come and spoken on our stage at Extreme Hangout. And yeah, again, I was speaking to somebody actually in the world of Formula E, the electric version of sort of Formula One motor racing, very male-dominated sport. But Formula E, they make sure that they have, or there are more and more women who are coming into that, and they are now winning and surpassing that. And it's taken a little while, but it's taken them to have that opportunity, and they're getting there. And where they have equal opportunity, they can shine, they can excel, and they can really contribute to these extraordinary endeavors. Sail GP, Extreme E, which is another motor racing program. They make sure that their teams have gender equity in them, and some of the athletes who participate in this, and the men as well who take part in huge programs where they've never seen women participating too. They have literally come and said, I never want it to be any other way now, because there's a
That's
different depth,
amazing.
there's different light that having women on board as part of their teams, it just brings a different richness to the whole experience. And that's just wonderful.
Amber, do you want to give a shout out to one particular athlete, a woman athlete who's done something just absolutely remarkable, in addition to the remarkable things that you've achieved that we mentioned at the top of the show?
Oh no, that's just because I like time out, and me on my paddleboard, I'm very happy. So that was just my way of taking a break. There are so many extraordinary female athletes. I literally, to name one, I would feel like it was going to wrong the rest of them.
I see. Okay.
I absolutely love the fact that today there is such an upswell. I was watching. There's a great TV show in the UK that my family were obsessed with when we were growing up. It's called Ski Sunday. And like, we never were a TV watching family at all. We were never allowed to be because we were outdoors. But Ski Sunday was absolutely something that we could watch. And they were reporting on British skiers and how they're getting on. And the women are just absolutely on fire. And some of the most crazy snowboarding, sort of extreme style competitions. I would never have had the bravery to do it myself, but it's extraordinary. This generation having been given these opportunities, they're showing the boys up, and it's super cool and really fun to see, because there are some of those opportunities that I didn't have, and I just get really excited for the girls now and watching them excel to such a rate.
That's amazing.
I have a question about women in sports. I don't know, Taylor, maybe you've heard that a lot of very successful women did team sports. I think maybe I would have been more successful had I had team sports, but I grew up before there were any. But I wonder then, the generation of women who get to do extreme sports, what are they going to be like? If we know that the leaders, most women leaders, have done team sports, what will women who have done extreme sports grow up to be?
I don't know. It's so interesting. It's making me think of, I'm a surfer, and, here in Hawaii, and it's like, we're not just now seeing kind of surfing be opened up to women. It's historically been an extremely male dominated sport, especially when it comes to professional surfing, but we're now getting to see women compete in the Olympics, and it's so impressive. And again, like, blowing the men out of the water, like literally and figuratively, right? It's like we watched like Carissa Moore, who's from Hawaii. She competed in the Olympics. I think she's won gold multiple times, and she was, I think, 4 or 5 months pregnant in the most recent Olympics, while she was surfing some of the biggest, most dangerous waves.
Oh my God.
On planet Earth. And it is so impressive and so inspiring to see these women finally given the shot to compete in a really male dominated space and just absolutely crushing it.
I love the quote that when people talk about Fred Astaire being an amazing dancer, I'm sure you've heard this quote: Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did, but backwards. The Carissa Moore did everything that male surfers are doing, but pregnant. So it's pretty impressive.
Very.
We're coming toward the close of our program, but I want to give both of our guests an opportunity to share a closing thought. So please share with us one thing that in this very contentious time gives you hope for the future. Amy, let's start with you. Something gives you hope.
Well, women are half the world. We have a lot to contribute, as we talked about before, about space programs, et cetera. And I believe that most humans are actually good, and they want the best for other humans. So I'm going to believe that people believe in fairness and will work together to create a more fair world. And there's the rise of consumer power, as well as political power for women in the United States and other countries. So this is how, when we share the burdens of society more equally, we have different solutions, and I think we can find solutions better. That's my hope. I could go on and on because I like being hopeful.
Thank you. No, that is so helpful in this contentious time. How about Amber?
Yeah, hope is a great superpower. I listen. I'm going to lean back into the love thing as well. I think that when we show sort of where our values right up in front and center of everything that we do, even when we are talking with the people who we disagree vehemently with, is I think that so much of this rhetoric and some of these bad decisions that are being made now come from points of fear, and it's misunderstanding, and it is. I think that that's something that we can absolutely change in people. So I just want to take this moment really just to celebrate all the extraordinary people that are doing so much, and that is some unbelievably brilliant men who are also helping to champion women as well. And wherever we can, when we're investing in ourselves or investing in our own children, where we can try and find another little girl or another young woman somewhere that we can also bring along and champion who may not otherwise be given those opportunities. I think that would be my shout out for everybody this year, is to like see if you can find another young lady or woman who's doing something brilliant that we can really help to shine a light on.
That's amazing, and it's to me it's so important when you have conversations with other people to hear their perspectives and to hear what they have to say, and that's why, Amber, what you're doing with Extreme Hangout, giving a platform to people who have who are disenfranchised and to give their voice a more prominence is so important. And Amy, what you're doing to guide us in terms of our purchase power and our wallets speaking for us is so important as well. So thank you both for your brilliant insights, and it is very hopeful to talk with both of you. I'm going to turn things back over to Taylor to wrap up, and thank you, Taylor, as well for your great insights as well.
Yes, thank you, Lance, and thank you, Amy and Amber. I think that, you know, it's been really nice to have this conversation, because it again shows that, like, you know, despite whatever pushback there is, like, progress is inevitable ultimately. I really believe that. But with that, I want to again give a big thank you to both of you, and to you, Lance, and to Paul. The Samuel Lawrence Foundation appreciates you so much for this conversation, for coming and taking the time to share your perspectives. Your work is incredibly inspiring, and I really hope that the audience goes ahead and follows up and checks out the work that you're both doing. With that, this concludes our program for today. If you'd like to rewatch or listen to this podcast or read a transcript, you can go to the Samuel Lawrence Foundation website in the coming days. The website is samuellawrencefoundation.org. This will also be up on Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Thank you again to both of our panelists. If you'd like to learn more about Extreme International and Gender Fair, you can find them both at on the Samuel Lawrence Foundation website. And thank you to Blue Planet Alliance for their partnership in the First Friday series. Please also visit brooklynstorylab.net to learn more about the purpose-driven work that they are doing globally. Lastly, come back next month in April. We'll have another episode of First Fridays, and this time we're going to be taking a look at the environment. We'll be honoring Earth Day. Until next time.